someone else. And that ranges from primates who are in often termed mate guarding, which is he tries to keep the female from going near any other guy, to all sorts of other stuff as well. And you certainly see this in the human realm. What are two cultural inventions humans have come up with to decrease the likelihood by men, to decrease the likelihood of women being sexually active outside that relationship? The first one is clitorectomies, and something else that serves a very similar function, which is inventions of things like chastity belts. What's up with that? What you find are cultural inventions like those in groups that tend to have occupations where males disappear for long periods. For example, nomadic pastoralists, where depending on the time of year, you pick up with your camels or your cows or whatever, and you, the guy, are going to spend the next 3 weeks at the grazing area that's good 5 miles west of there. And what this is about, the argument culturally for the clitorectomies, is it decreases female pleasure, decreases the likelihood of her having sex with someone else when you were elsewhere. What were chastity belts about when the guy picked up and decided to spend the next 6 years trying to liberate Jerusalem from the Ottomans or whatever off in the Crusades? And just so you don't have any ideas over the next half decade while I go die from the plague somewhere in Eastern Europe, that's when those were, again, a model of cultures where there are extended periods of men being away from women. You have very often elaborate cultural inventions for men trying to control the reproductive access of women. What that also winds up doing is explaining what was thought to be the dominant models of reproductive success and reproductive choice in all sorts of other species. And seen, for example, in something like baboons, what you had was termed the linear access model of reproduction. It goes as follows. You have a social group, for example, a baboon social group, and there is only one female who is an estrus, only one female who is ovulating. Who winds up mating with her? The alpha male in the troop. Now instead, there's two females who are ovulating. Who gets the two females? Numbers 1 and 2 in the hierarchy. 3 females, numbers 1, 2, and 3 get the female, and implicit in that is the activeness implied in the word get, the passive lack of choice at the female end of things. This was the linear access model in which male dominance rank was entirely predictive of male reproductive success. So that's what people thought lots about then. That was the original thinking about the relationship between male dominance rank and reproductive success. As we will see shortly, it's not quite so clear. Lots of other species where you see males attempting, in the evolutionary sense, attempting to limit female access to other males. This is the whole world of copulatory plugs. Lots of dog canine-related species where a semen plug is left there in the vagina of the female, which soon hardens into a plug and like nothing else is happening there. You see that. There are other cases. There are fly species where the male's penis is barbed and, ooh, I heard a, I'm not drawing that. What are you thinking? Where it's barbed and where the barbs, in fact, go in the opposite direction, point back at the male. What's that? You get the penis in there and it's not coming out again. It's like one of those, you know, those, you put your fingers, okay. Well, it's actually not like one of those, but you get the point. And what's that about? The male leaves his penis in there, which he manages to do without afterward because they can make new ones. And this is a very different world you've got here. Then you've got the whole world we've already heard about sperm competition, of sperm from one male in various fly species containing toxins that will kill the sperm of another male. Then there's a whole interesting world that goes on, which is when males mate with a female, they do something biochemically which decreases the sexual attractiveness of the female subsequent to that. In a number of fly species, males with mating release a chemical which decreases mating pheromone production in the female. And suddenly, nobody else is interested in her. Or there are other fly species where males release a chemical which decreases sexual proceptivity in the female, viciously clever ways for males to control female reproductive behavior after they've left male-male competitive strategies. So what do you see at the female end of things? No surprise, you see female counter strategies. One brilliant one that evolved in humans is this relatively unique human phenomenon of hidden ovulation. Yes, all that pheromone stuff and smelling people's armpits and things that don't happen much in the real world, but what you see for the most part is that humans are not terribly aware of where somebody is in their cycle. Humans have invented hidden ovulation. What's that meant to do? Decrease paternity certainty. And one argument is that's a good mechanism for decreasing the likelihood of competitive infanticide. The other is it decreases male attempt to control female sexual behavior because it's less clear when you need to be doing that. So counter strategies. More examples. This is argued that in some species that have non-reproductive sex throughout the cycle, that is a female counter strategy to again fool the male when ovulation is actually occurring, increasing the likelihood that at such times she can get somebody else's genes. Other strategies, we've already heard about one, back in the competitive infanticide one, which is that whole world of females that can fake being an estrus, that go through pseudo-estrus. All of this meant to be ways of keeping males a little bit less certain of when they should be trying to control female sexual access, and thus she has more choice in the matter. What that brings us to is thus, oh, that's something interesting that I left out.
Oh, fuck.
It's not that interesting. Okay. So back to male-male competition. This was first looking at male and lots of species, male attempts to regulate female sexual behavior, female counter strategies. What's up with male-male competition in terms of evolution and sexual behavior? Most obvious one being is male-male competition for reproductive access. And the standard old models being that linear access model, one female winds up with number one male, two, and so on. What that thus begins to explain is when you look at all social species out there, the leading cause of aggression is male-male aggression built around female access. And as we'll see by next week, that is the case as well for every human culture ever looked at. You also see, of course, the sperm competition. And once again, we have one of those issues with humans, which is where do we fit on the spectrum there? If you have monogamous species, males tend to produce only small amounts of sperm and tend to have small testes. When you have polygamous species, males want to pump out insane amounts of sperm to increase the likelihood of outcompeting some other guy's sperm if it shows up on the scene, or for making a sperm plug, and what you wind up getting there in those species are large testes. So you look at the various primates, and chimps have gigantic testicles per body size. Gorillas do not. Gorillas that have a very different world of male-male. What about humans? Once again, the same exact thing. We are about halfway in between. When compared to other primates, we are intermediate between a tournament species and a pair bonding species in yet another domain. We've been hearing about this again and again. Something really interesting that has been shown in humans, which is, no, I'm not going to tell that. It's too hard to explain. But it was great. You would really wish. So now what we have is also looking at evolutionary aspects of female choice in there. And in what cases do you get female-female competition? First off, the answer was obvious in terms of looking at traditional tournament species, which is that females have no choice who they're mating with. It's linear access models. One female winds up with the alpha male, two females, and so on. And this was the dominant model in all of primatology starting in the 60s. And then by around 1980 or so, it was recognized that in fact there's virtually no evidence for strict linear access models of the main determinant of who a female mates with is who's the winner of male-male competitive interactions. People discovered at the time that in fact there was this strange violation of all these models because it turned out the models were not based on behavior. And this generally was discovered around that time because that was around the time that the majority of primatologists on Earth suddenly became female and started looking at the female end of things and discovered that this linear access stuff is not in fact what occurs. And out of that came a completely shocking concept that ran through primatology like a bolt of lightning. The notion that there was this is the technical term, some degree of female choice. Oh, whoa. That's kind of bizarre, where females have something to do with who they mate with. And there's been a whole world of primatology studies since then showing what female choice is about. First off, how does female choice occur in a typical tournament species? You got this problem. With primates, for example, you wind up with a pair bond, with a consortship between a male and an ovulating female. And because it's a tournament species, the male is twice the size or has big, huge canines or whatever stuff he's got there. He is physically able to dominate the female quite readily. You do not see female choice in those cases being exerted by the female beating up on the guy and her getting to go mate with who she's interested in. What you see is much more clever behavior on the part of the female. She will, for example, exhaust the guy. Every time he sits down to feed, the female gets up and starts walking. And he has to jump up and, pile together the picnic and go running after. Every time he tries to take a nap, she goes walking. Or what you find with baboons is the most clever thing that females do is they go walk and lead the male right in front of his worst rival. Or then they'll do it again and again and again and get the guy totally haired out and crazed. And at some point, those two males will have a fight. And what then happens is she runs off to the bushes and has what is technically called a stolen copulation with the guy she's actually interested in. So maybe it's not so bad to be a female baboon. So now what this brings us to, insofar as this alternative female strategy is available, we now come to this absolutely critical question, one that has run through the ages, which is, what do female baboons want? Who do they want to mate with? And people are not positive, but there's some suggestion in the data. It needs to be replicated more. There's this trend, but there's this suggestion that female baboons like to mate with male baboons who are nice to them. No, are they sure? Are they certain? Have they done their statistics right? They go and they mate with guys who groom them a lot. Guys who play with their infants, guys who, when they're in a bad mood, don't beat up on them, but beat up on somebody else. I mean, this counts as a prince of a male baboon. This is someone you take home to meet mom when he's in a bad mood, he pummels someone else, not me. This is someone you want to mate with. And in the mid-1980s, excellent primatologist Barbara Smuts of University of Michigan came up with the very jargony scientific term that all sorts of non-human primates have intersexual friendships. And that's not an anthropomorphic term. What it was, though, was people sort of snickering at it, in that the initial notion was that these were just friends. These were platonic monkey relationships. They were not about reproduction. And it was not until people got good enough and enough data to start picking up on all those stolen copulations to see that the females were picking up and mating with their nice guy. Oh, we're just friends. I can never see them. Whoa, and they're suddenly in the bushes with him. And it suddenly turned from the, yeah, nice guys finish last. Okay, they do lots of grooming, but let's count number of copies of genes, to becoming apparent that the being a nice guy was a viable alternative reproductive strategy as long as there was this thing of female choice. And what the paternity studies began to show was that was a very viable alternative strategy, in part because you're not mating anywhere near as much. If you were a low-ranking affiliative male with a female, you're not mating anywhere near as much as the high-ranking males, but you're not burning out, you're not getting injured, you're not having the male-male fighting, you live a lot longer, and this keeps happening. There's a problem, though, which is, suppose you are a female baboon, and you want to mate with this nice guy, and one of the things that he's nice about is he's nice to your kid, who's now about 3-4 years old, and there's a very good chance that where that affiliative relationship started with him, got jump-started, was the fact that he was the most likely father of that kid, and has developed somewhat of an affiliative relationship with the kid, and hangs out with them, and hangs out with you, and so you've established this is a nice guy I want to mate with. But there's a problem, which was, if he was the likely father of your now 3-4-year-old offspring, the odds are that 3-4 years ago, he was a pretty high-ranking male. And what that means now, 3-4 years later, is he's likely to be some aging guy over the hill whose rank has been dropping. In other words, not someone who is going to be very effective at male-male competition. And you get this horrible sort of tension there going on between the male-male competitive world generates some Arnold Schwarzenegger jerk who's the one who's supposed to, where she wants to mate with Alan Alda or whoever. And what you have then is he's not up to the male-male competitive stuff because he's some aging guy, and you instead have the world of stolen copulations. So isn't that great? Isn't that heartwarming? A whole world of what are now called alternative strategies. If you're some schemy male baboon wanting to pass on as many copies of your genes, you may decide the really manipulative thing to do is to be nice to some female and groom her more than she grooms you, which is a very rare thing for a male baboon to do. So great alternative strategies, very heartwarming. Not so heartwarming, because there are other alternative strategies available in some species, alternatives where male sexual behavior is not the outcome of explicit male-male competition, but instead takes an alternative strategy. And you see one example of this in orangutans. Orangutans, great apes, and they've got a very interesting, bizarre social system. But what you have is your basic, nonetheless, sort of familiar picture of male-male competition. A large percentage of orangutan male aggression is built around reproductive access to females, and you've got a whole world of very peripheralized, low-ranking males who never mate. And there's an interesting physiology that goes along with it. That was the picture that everybody used to have. And then in the 1970s, pioneer researcher in this, Baruti Galdikas, who has studied orangs for decades out there in Indonesia, she noted something really disturbing, which is low-ranking, non-reproductive male orangs have an alternative mating strategy. What do? They rape females. And this was the first introduction of that term into zoology, and that is not an anthropomorphism. If defined as a violent process of mating with a female against her will, this is what goes on in orangutans. A certain percentage of reproduction is low-ranking guys who have no direct access to females as a result of male-male interaction. This is not the nice guy alternative, so there is precedent for this also. And this is by now very well documented behavior among orangutans. Then, if you want to come up with something very subtle and clever, there's apparently this whole world of fish species where low-ranking males can pretend to be female and take on female coloration and pretend to be just friends and someone you could pour their heart out to, and suddenly one day they're like, where did that come from? And everything suddenly changes there. Okay, so we have the very strict, boring models. Females invest more calories than males, and thus they are much more picky. Males mate with females entirely as a function of male-male competition, and thus evolution is driven by male aggression and all of that. Let me just see as people are clearly about to run out the door.
For more, please visit us at Stanford.